I'm pleased now to be able to present Dr. Alison Langmead from the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Langmead will consider some of the ways that imaging technologies have historically contributed to and shaped the fields of art history and architectural history. Her lecture is titled Studying Images Through and with Technologies. Dr. Langmead?
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Today I'm here to talk about actually a few of the conference goals. I really appreciated receiving this the other day in my email. It definitely focused things that I wanted to say. I am aware that I was asked to give this talk because of my past work on the way that art history as a discipline was shaped by the image technologies that it has used. And so I'm here today to present some of that work, but also to then do number 2 here, which is provide an opening to a conversation about the way that digital technologies also can have and may contribute and change our field. So this is a little more philosophical, why we do the things we do, perhaps, than historical, but I hope you're interested in coming along for the ride. What I've done is I've taken 2 pieces that are published that I worked on. Most of my work is collaborative. A lot of it is interdisciplinary with technologists and other fields. And I've taken these 2 pieces. I'm happy to put these in the chat when we're done if people want to refer to them. And I'm riffing on them. I'm combining them and rephrasing them. And what's happened, and here's the place where I have to do a traditional speaker thing and apologize before I speak, which is that what it's done is it's led me to some much bigger ideas that I am working my way through. So I am very interested to hear questions that might come out of what I say today. And if there are any loose ends, I apologize in advance, but in fact, I somewhat expect them. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about phenakistoscopes. So Jennifer Eisenhower actually has a really nice article in Art Education on discourses of visual production technologies. And she talks about them in terms of magic vision, scientific vision, and corporate vision. And I am very enthusiastic about this framing. But as a scholar of art education, I'm interested that Eisenhower didn't have there be an art historical vision or even an artistic vision. And I know why, and I appreciate it. But these sort of mystical, magical, late 19th century technologies of light and magic and showmanship are very much at the heart of art history as it's been practiced in the 20th century. There's a picture I found the other day of Brian Earle, a former professor of communication at Cornell, who used that lantern slide projector in the 2000s to teach history. And of course, that projector is one that many of us, I actually took a class with a rather elderly professor who still used lantern slides. And this is just one way that I can speak briefly about the way that the technologies that we have used historically have shaped us. It isn't because of lantern slides that we do side-by-side comparisons, but gosh darn it, having one slide on the left and one slide on the right is a lot similar to the way that you can see this projector works here. There's one slide lying in wait, and there's one slide being projected. Taking part of this magic light show of lantern projection, where you can show not 1 but 2 images in alternation, making points. And of course, we used 35mm slides in pairs back in the day, and we still do on PowerPoints as we move forward. But the joy of Dr. Earle's expression here with this projector, I think is contagious. So today, if you won't mind, I'd like to step you through 4 lenses. These are framing devices of my own. They're not anything more than that. They're not real. They're not really even an argument. They're just the 4 that came to me when I was asked to do an abstract for this talk. I'm going to make loose connections between these frames and the work that David Newberry and I have done on the notion of pointers and proxy work in digital images. Because pointer work and proxy work happens regardless of your technologies. And we'll see how that works going forward. So here they are: images as objects, images as evidence, images as not text, and images as numbers. So let's start with images as objects. So I have here a subtitle on this slide because, as is clear and obvious as this may be, that both the artworks that we discuss in art history and the images of those artworks are both objects in and of themselves. I feel very strongly that the actual impact of that that co-statement of these objects' reality in our work isn't necessarily as emphasized as it might be. In part because we need the images to take a role in our work. These images are objects with a place in the world, and we want the ability to compare the original art objects, and we want the ability to compare across time. And image reproduction technologies allow us to do that without producing individual museums for every argument that an art historian might like to make, although some very wealthy collectors were certainly able to do that on their own, or visiting each object individually and holding them in our minds only. These images that we use to make arguments about objects that are not them but are beyond them are a key to our ability to produce art history, but they're all images and they're all objects with different affordances of their own. So I promise to move to digital images in a bit, but please let me stay here with 35mm technology for a moment as working with the objectives of this conference to talk about past technologies and how it shaped our field. So without 35mm slides, we simply would not have the art history that we have today. Large duplicative collections of thousands and thousands of images distributed across art history departments around the world allowed for a synthetic comparative approach to making human meaning, making the meaning legible in and around art objects, the objects that are represented by these slides. But of course, the slides themselves are objects with affordances and properties and characteristics that impacted what we could say and impacted how we did say it. So I've offered an ectochrome slide here, which many of you will remember fading to this magenta. All the other dyes in this film stock were known to disappear, leaving only the magenta layer. And yet we still taught from them. And yet we still taught from black and white images. And that is fine. Art history, what does it mean to teach from a black and white image? What does it mean to teach from a magenta only slide? The art history we have today can work fine with that because it had to. The technologies that we used, we worked in, through, and around them as well. There's a lot of course, nostalgia about this, which actually brings me perfectly to my next point. So by means of offering perhaps a different way to view slide technologies and in line with Eisenhower's magic vision, scientific and corporate vision, I offer you here Don Draper from Mad Men. Fans of the show or not fans from the show might recognize this scene where our advertising executive, Don Draper, in the upper left is asked to sell the carousel slide projector. The members of the Kodak team are here, and these are members of the advertising agency over on the left. And he's been asked to sell it as technology. Don has been asked to sell this as technology by Kodak. And he says, and I would play this, and in fact, maybe I should have. I might describe it longer than it took him to say it. The scene is about 3 minutes and 30 seconds long, and it's easily found on YouTube, Don Draper Carousel. I recommend it to everybody. He's asked to sell this as technology, and he's asked to sell it as a wheel, but he's asked to sell it as a technology, and he gives us this statement. He says, where treating technology as new creates an itch in the mind of people, what he wanted to do was create a sentimental bond. He uses the term nostalgia. He uses it etymologically, slightly incorrectly, but it's as good as TV can get, which he talks about as a feeling of pain, which of course algia is. He talks about it pain rather than itching, a pain that's delicate but potent, a technology that's about pain so much more than it is about itching and new. He calls it a twinge in your heart, far more powerful than memory alone. This device isn't a spaceship, and the writers of the show have in mind that, of course, the spaceship was a technology that these men and one woman in the back, you see her in the upper left, would have known from the time period in which they were living. So not a technology that's fantastical but real. No, Don wants to sell this as a time machine, a technology that we don't have. It takes us to a place where we ache to go again. this sentimental bond of connection, of humanity, of empathy, rather than one of magic wonder. And I'm happy to say this is about the point where I mentally made a lot of connections with Jessica's talk previously. The way that technology here is about engagement in the world. And what I'd like to say is that you might, it's very possible that we can consider Don Draper's selling of the carousel as a time machine of ache that reminds you of the past, that reminds you of other places, that is about a sentimental attachment, is something that art history doesn't have anything to do with. I would actually like to ask, in what way is my bringing Picasso's work here, of course in reproduction, of course in this case in digital reproduction, like a space-time machine, bringing things from MoMA here, bringing things from the past here. In what ways do we think of this technology as a form of a space-time machine, allowing us to see and feel and have experiences of things that aren't there in ways that we can pretend are more authentic and face-to-face? Now, am I saying we can't say anything about these paintings without standing in front of them? No, of course I am not, but I am saying art history grew up around the assumption that we can. Now, here I'm talking about the reproduction, but if I could talk about this original artwork for a second, in what way do we treat this artwork like a space-time machine? In what way do we treat the paint on this canvas, should it be here in front of us, as a traveler from the past that has the chance of connecting us to places and times we can no longer directly experience? And this I connect to this idea David and I went through in that piece of images as pointers. And I'm not going to do a whole lot of definitional work here. I'm hoping the difference between pointers and proxies will also become clear as I work forward. But here I want to say this bullet point here is used as a marker for the way that these images and the image reproductions, both objects in and of themselves, point to different things, places, ideas, and even times in the world, an index for things past and present, because I do believe we use them in that way very appropriately and effectively. All right, images as evidence. Taken to the extreme, I don't believe that images themselves are the cultural artifacts. There was a controversial article that came out a week or so ago about trustworthiness and portraiture. And in that piece, they were talking about the artworks as the remnants of people's past psychologies and that they function as cognitive fossils of extinct mentalities and social preferences. And I don't think that that's accurate, but I think I have good reason to do so that relate to Jessica's talk that we just heard. So these are also slides, of course. There are slides for microscopes. There's slides like 35 millimeter slides. There's slides containing specimens from the late 19th century. Each of these slides has a formerly living object in it, and it's being used here as evidence for a class of objects. This fly here is an example of a type of fly that we've classified. And in that way, as evidence, we could consider this here to be an example of Etruscan sculpture. Here is a trapped Etruscan sculpture in this 35 millimeter slide. And in many ways, the Linnaean system of classification could be considered a similar mental exercise to the 20th century practice of dividing the history of art up into styles, but there is a crucial difference, to me at least, and this is a point of philosophy. These slides here are about describing things humans did not make. Sure, we made the categories, but we didn't make the fly. These categories here are about objects of human intention. When we categorize them, we do it necessarily as gods in this domain. Human beings made these forms. Human beings made these categories. We didn't make the stone, but we did make the shapes on them that we tend to be talking about. Now, let me be the first to say there are plenty of things we could talk about this slide, about that sculpture, that have to do, of course, with the material formal features. In fact, what then, therefore, are we usually talking about when these are evidence of things? Are they remnants of people's past psychologies? I put it to you, though, that some of this is Don Draper's nostalgia, the pain of disconnection soothed in part by the sight of something distant present, something remembered present, something that proves that other people feel, see, and perhaps think something like we do, or at least if it's different, we can feel the connection in the difference of shared human experience. What might the gesture of raising one's arm above one's head with elbow pointing skyward suggest in these different contexts? What can it mean across time is often a question we ask. How do these objects provide evidence of that? And this is related to the point images as proxy argument. What do these images stand in for? What can we glean from them about other things? But as I noted before, the methods we use to interpret this evidence need to be chosen with care. Intentional systems do not obey the same rules as natural systems necessarily, and our human relationship between intentional and natural systems are by definition different. Now, I need to go a little bit off topic here, forgive me. I utterly agree with Jessica that I'm not saying keep them different. I am saying they were born different. Science put this intentionality aside on purpose for their own reason, and to bring them together is in fact an interesting goal of the now. So the evidence just isn't evidence of what, it's evidence shown how and with what assumptions. So images is not text. Let us move a little bit towards digital image reproductions here. I have about 4 minutes left. Again, keeping with the second guiding idea of the conference, which is providing an opening for others to be a part of the conversations about technology, digital technologies, and art history. So the not text. So computers are symbol processors, and insofar as that's the case, I'm showing you a character encoding set here. It's a complicated affair to encode text in a computer, but as the underlying currency of a computer is a discrete symbol, many textual expressions fit nicely in that paradigm. Images don't, as do many linguistic systems, by the way. Not all linguistic systems are really easily attached to this sort of thing. So the question becomes, for those who want to be engaged, how do images get into the world of computers? And students who know me know I'm about to say, it happens by the magic of turning light into numbers. Here's a CCD. Now we often use CMOS, which has more processing in one way, but you can see here, this is incident visible photon that goes through this system analog signal processor, and out here comes numbers, the digital representation of the picture. It turns photons into symbols, and how we then interpret and manipulate and think about those discrete symbols is what computers bring to the processing of digital images. Now, I hope you guys are seeing, I'm down so many layers of representation, from the object to maybe the image you're scanning or just taking a picture in person, all the way down to these numbers. Digital images are not just 35mm slides somehow slightly transformed. They have utterly different affordances as objects in and of themselves. We can treat them like we did 35mm slides, but that would ignore how it is that the specific affordances of those slides shaped how we allowed ourselves to talk about the objects that they represented for us in our minds. Neither the photographic slides nor the digital images are invisible. They are lenses that change how we view the world by their own object characteristics. And digital images as pointers are very powerful. We use here, this digital image is helping us see where this object is in the world. It is the networked infrastructure of computers that make this pointing so powerful. We don't just point on the classroom now, we can point globally. It's a giant change based on the affordances of digital technologies. Images as numbers. So they look like this under the hood. These symbols have the power to be rendered, and these symbols here have the power to be rendered through transducers, as the lady with the pearl earring, but they can be perceived in other ways. And so briefly, with my minute and a half that I had before I'm officially over time, let me show you what I mean. When computer scientists talk about texture, they're not talking about the surface of the object. They're talking about in the digital image object itself, They're talking about large differences in the numbers of the way that the object is represented. Here we have black and white stripes on the left, 0 being black, 255 being white, over and over, and that's rough. The distance between 0 and 255 is high. Smooth is all one number. So what? You might say. Well, these numbers can be unreasonably effective, and you can find the edges of things quite distinctly using just image texture. Are we still in an art history talk? We are, but we're talking about the way the affordances of these technologies can show us things or not. It depends on the methods we use and what we're trying to say. We are using them as proxies for the real world. These numbers, these symbols, these easily manipulable objects as proxies for things in the world. What can these symbols stand for is not obvious. It is a question, and it is a question that art history would do well to cope with. We need to be in that conversation to find out what these symbols can and cannot do for us in our field. I'm using old technologies. Computer vision folks may think I'm using old technologies, but let me use a brand spanking new one. These are visualizations of the pooling layers of convolutional neural networks that come from Paul Rodriguez and work that Chris Nygren and I are doing with the San Diego Supercomputing Center. These are how images seem to be visualizable as they are being processed through convolutional neural nets. They are visualizations of processes that humans do not natively do themselves, but that humans did design with their own two hands in the computer, so to speak. Because these were made by computers, and because computers are made by people, these are human intentional representations of the natural world in their own way. This is something a human made out of the world with a computer. This is an image that a human made out of the world with a computer. But what it means is not yet known, and I think we should find out. Thank you.